Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for an inspiring conversation about one of my favorite topics, mental health. My name is Andrew Miki, and I'm your moderator this morning. I'm a Laurier alumnus and a registered psychologist. As we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that Wilfrid Laurier's university campuses are located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples. Perhaps you're joining us from another location, and in that case, I'd encourage you to take a moment to honor the Indigenous peoples who have lived and worked where you reside historically and presently. Acknowledging them reminds us of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work. We recognize, honor, and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of the land and water. In a few moments, we will hear from each of our panelists about their research and perspectives on self-care. Then we'll open up our conversation to the audience. So feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A box as we go, and I'll pose them to our panelists later. To begin the conversation, I'd like to introduce our speakers, Sybil Geldart and Florence Juma. Dr. Sybil Geldart is an associate professor of psychology at Laurier, with research interests broadly based in human development and clinical psychology. She has more than 30 years of instructing experience and currently teaches in the areas of abnormal psychology, clinical psychology, and special education. Outside the university, Sybil has a part-time clinical practice and is a registered psychologist with the College of Psychologists of Ontario. The Reverend Dr. Florence A. Juma is a certified spiritual care practitioner and psychospiritual therapist serving at Grand River Hospital in Kitchener. She is also an associate professional faculty member at Martin Luther University College and a registered psychotherapist in Ontario. Florence's research interests include the integration of spiritual disciplines in psychotherapy to foster emotional and mental wellness with individuals and families, the interplay of spirituality and the aging process, and exploration of the experiential approaches in therapy and the correlation with African Indigenous responses to emotional trauma. Thank you both for sharing your time with us this morning. Now I will turn the floor over to Sybil.
Hello, and thank you. Thank you, Laurier, for having me on the panel and for everyone who's joining today. I'll share my screen. So that I can talk to you a little bit about alone time and how I feel that some alone time in life, some solitude is beneficial for your health and well-being. I'm not talking about a lot of solitude, and I'm certainly not speaking about social isolation, which, as we all know, is not healthy for us. But I will be talking about some aspects of life where it is healthy to be able to spend some time to focus on one's personal space, that is your physical space, as well as your mental space, in terms of being introspective, reflective, and figuring out what your needs are, especially in an ever-changing world. To do that, though, I need to go back to what got me started in this, which is my previous research in occupational health psychology. I was interested in the role of organizational factors in workplace health and safety. I began by studying manufacturing firms in Ontario. I was interested in a bunch of different kinds of factors, things like the behaviors of managers and supervisors, their attitudes towards health and safety of workers and that sort of thing. And what I found was that so many different elements of management commitment, I'm calling it this umbrella of management commitment, was a significant correlate of lower injury rates in manufacturing firms. It also resulted in greater employee satisfaction at work and better mental health of employees as they are self-reporting. I have since looked at management commitment across business sectors, so not just in manufacturing firms, but in office settings as well. The bottom line is Managers who value their employees, who actually spend workplace money to improve working conditions, and who bring in their subordinates into decision making when it comes to health and safety, they actually produce fewer workplace injuries and lower ill health. And when I talk about bringing in decision making, what I'm acknowledging is that what managers are doing is they're having their workers involved, having their workers take responsibility, feel empowered. And for something like a manufacturing firm, that may be being involved in deciding what is appropriate personal protective equipment or other types of safety measures. Bottom line is, my research has shown that management commitment benefits all of us. It benefits individual workers to keep us safe and healthy. But it also helps the people who work, who actually run the organization. It allows for greater profits and reduced insurance premiums. So really, it is a benefit to all. I'm really happy to say that my work on management commitment has flourished since, and many people are looking at this in today's workplace. It does beg the question, though, as to workplace health and safety and how we might assess it, how we might assess management commitment, for example, when we're engaged in remote work. Here, I note that the pandemic forced many of us, most of us, to engage in work from home. I have to say, it wasn't easy for me. As a university professor, I had to learn how to teach university lectures to my students using Zoom. All of us had to kind of figure that one out. And to do assessments online, like giving tests in a final examination. So the pandemic really forced me to be involved in working from home on my own. At the same time, I had a healthy part-time clinical practice where I had patients, children, teenagers, adults come to see me at my clinic, and I helped them. I gave therapy. Well, that stopped during the pandemic, and I had to learn how to use Zoom for healthcare in order to continue using therapy. It was difficult, but it did happen. And I note that even without the pandemic, with changes in work organization, more and more people are trying to figure out how to make remote work happen for them. In that case, it is imperative for all of us to figure out, how do workers ourselves, how do we know that we're creating safe and healthy work conditions when we're working from home? By the way, how do supervisors stay on top of safety issues when their workers are working from home? It's not like your supervisor is going to waltz into your home and figure out if you're doing things safely. So then the question becomes, how do you engage in safe practices? Well, my work has come into developing some solutions, and I'd like to share some of those with you. Again, if I can talk about the value of personal space, in this case for work. The first thing to do is to remove distractors. Let's take a look at that first picture of this gentleman who's working from home. As you can see, he's got a few distractions. He's on his cell phone, and he's also looking after his toddler, making it probably very difficult to do his work and making it probably very stressful. So a lot of recommendations in terms of how to remove distractors, how to find a room with a door, privacy, and also quietness so that you can engage in work effectively. A second solution is really surrounding work-life boundaries. Take a look at how much time you work. Well, if you go to the office and you have an office job and you're there from 8:30 to 4:30, you know how much time you're working. Well, at home, it isn't so clear. In fact, research is telling us that when workers are working from their home base, they are working upwards from 10 to 12 hours per day. Now, if that were to continue, that would lead to burnout, emotional burnout, and depression. It is just not sustainable. So really, it is going to be up to the worker to figure out on her own, on his own, how to establish breaks. Again, if you're at the office, it would be easy to sort of filter out with your gang for a nice lunch break, maybe go for a walk on a nice day during lunch. But at home, do we do that for ourselves? Likely not. I know that when I get up early in the morning, I make my coffee and I sit at my computer. I'm already checking emails and I'm already actually answering emails. So I've effectively started my workday around 6:37, which means I probably have a very long workday, even with breaks in between. For lunchtime, I might go make some rice, warm up some chicken, go back to my desk and take a look at what I have on my computer screen. Again, I'm not taking formal breaks, and those are important to recharge. Really necessary, but something that we don't necessarily think about when we're engaging in work on our own independently. Let's also consider building in ergonomics, which is a real favorite of mine. Take a look at these two gals. They're working from home. I saw myself in that first image sitting with my back leaning up against the couch, developing university lectures during the pandemic. That is not sustainable either. Musculoskeletal injuries happen when we are not using ergonomically correct office furniture. Well, at the office, our supervisors, our managers can help us achieve good tools to help us stay healthy. But at home, we have to figure that out on our own. And so I think it is imperative that workers do take accountability and responsibility to figure out what their needs are and maybe have conversations with the workplace, with their managers, supervisors, to figure out if there are some resources or money that can be used to making the workplace at home more healthy and safe. The last example I give with respect to work is developing self-learning skills. So think about it. If you are someone who likes to work from home, what is your focus and concentration like? Do you have stamina to work for long periods? Do you know when to take breaks? Do you find yourself needing to take rewards after a period of time in order to continue and follow through with tasks? Do you monitor your own performance? How efficiently are you working or effectively? What is your time management skills? Are you the kind of person who has to work 7 to 7 because you've wasted some time during the day? Again, very important things to think about, and not necessarily something that a worker needs to figure out on their own, but to think about how maybe to bring in management to talk about how to make the home workplace more a better place to be in terms of being safe and healthy. In fact, I have created and developed my own self-help book, which is published, and it is for the general audience, for you and me, to help you in many different facets of life, asking you to carve out time for yourself to improve in many areas, particularly as we are living in an ever-changing world. One chapter does go right into the whole concept of how to make remote work better for you. Another chapter is on how to make coursework better, whether you're a young person who's doing your work from home or a lifelong learner. Lots of different tips and strategies that will help you develop that personal space and figure out what you need to do for your own health and well-being. My book also goes into helping in different areas, overcome adversity, reducing depression. Of course, when there is depression or severe anxiety, clinicians help, therapists can help. But my book also talks about how you can carve out some time, some personal space, physical space, mental space to help you overcome adversity, to help you deal with depression and anxiety. And I want to leave off today with some aspects of how to help in dealing with anxiety because it is a common concern today. Again, we're living in a busy world, a chaotic world. People want to be productive, they want to be multitaskers, but it does result in a lot of anxiety for many. This slide is really showing you the elements of our alarm system, the system inside us that becomes activated when we feel stressed, when we feel there is danger or a threat. Things like the pounding heart or faster breathing, sweating or having chills, or feeling like you can't concentrate, feeling dizzy, having stomach upset or nausea. So in my book, I teach about these elements, that it is possible that we have danger and therefore need to deal with it, or that humans have a very active, smart brain where we imagine and sometimes believe that there is danger or threat when there really isn't. So I try to bring up practical tips and strategies for people to use on their own to help them overcome their anxious feelings. And this slide is really giving you some examples of that. There are many different examples. Again, asking people to figure out how to do this for yourself using your own space and time. My favorite is my chapter on what I call the anxiety cure. And for this one, I believe it is a longer-term solution, a better solution to help deal with our everyday stressors and anxiety that we feel. Again, it does mean finding that personal space. You need to be alone, comfy chair, quiet. You need to visually scan for danger and note that there is no danger your way. And the third step is to focus on those internal physiological or bodily sensations that I mentioned before, noting that they happen because your alarm system is activated, but also knowing that they can be overcome, that you yourself can control those symptoms. You don't need anyone else to do it for you. You need to notice that they're there. You need to focus, and you need to ride out those anxious feelings. It does take a while. It isn't easy to do on the first go, but my book does give quite a few tips on helping people on how to get there. And then, of course, to end the exercise when anxiety goes away. I have given you a bunch of different examples, most notably from my work on occupational health and safety, but looking at different facets of life and how you can use your alone time to enhance your health and well-being. I hope it has been helpful today.
Thank you for sharing, Sybil. Now we're going to hear from Florence.
Thank you for this opportunity to contribute in this panel, and in the process, gain some insight from my fellow panelists and also from all the members based on the questions that will come out and as we explore answers together. I'd like to share my screen also. Thank you, Sybil, and I'll pick up from where you pick up and overlap a bit from where you mentioned occupational health. And the interesting thing is that spirituality is not just a resource for personal growth and well-being or for family growth and well-being. There has been interest in spirituality within organizations. It's growing, and how to incorporate or find ways to engage and tap at resources that can help and increase our both physical and mental well-being. So I will come from the perspective of how spirituality can be a resource in our ongoing efforts to maintain health and well-being, or do some work on our own personal self-care. Now, the interest in that came from my ongoing work, but also my own personal quest in just enhancing my well-being. So I'll start with the definition of terms. When it comes to spirituality, there is as many understandings of the term as the number of researchers in the field. But we'll just look at some of the main elements, key concepts to have an overview and ground the presentation today. And then there is debunking the myths. And I will draw from the collective research that has been put out there with the Canadian Association for Spiritual Care, given this is the Spiritual Health Awareness Week. So I'll draw from some of that information and conclude by inviting all of us to find ways or explore options where we can integrate spirituality for holistic health. Now, spirit, the definition of spirit, the very basic definition is the vital, non-physical part of a person, which is the seat of emotions and character and transcends death, and also referred to as the soul. That's just from the multiple dictionaries. I took this one from the Merriam, but many dictionaries give a similar definition. Now, spirituality, one definition is, spirituality is the aspect of humanity that refers to the way individuals seek and express meaning and purpose, and the way they experience their connectedness to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant other or sacred. It has been, there is a consensus among researchers that to come to one agreement, one definition of the term spirituality is not possible. But there is an overlap and an understanding and an acceptance of certain elements. And words like meaning and purpose, connectedness, relationships, and experience, and in some cases, the search for the ultimate, are words that tend to pop up in multiple definitions by multiple authors. In the last 20 years, there has been increased interest and research. And I come from it from the perspective of healthcare. I work in healthcare and predominantly work in mental health with individuals who live with the diagnosis of mental illness, mental disorders. And so my research is driven from the perspective of trying to seek and find ways in which spirituality can be a resource in the recovery process, aspects of spirituality that can be a resource for individuals living with that diagnosis. Now, World Health Organizations define mental health as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to contribute to his or her community, can cope with normal stresses of life. Sometimes the assumption is that when one is in a state of mental wellness and well-being, then that means there are no stresses in life. It just means that they are stable enough that those stresses that are expected, normal challenges in lifespan, one can cope and thrive. Now, spirituality is conceptualized as a process through which individuals seek and discover transcendent and meaning in their lives. So when we are seeking to integrate spirituality in our day-to-day lives for our both physical, emotional, and mental well-being, for each person it may look different based on what their working definition is or their understanding of spirituality is. I just gleaned a few here to show how they're as varied as the different authors, but there is a commonality, there is a common thread that runs through. Koenig, Laurier, and Godke say that spirituality is broad and complex concept, which varies its understanding according to different cultural, religious, and academic backgrounds. Now, Pagman says that spirituality is a set of pathways that people follow in search of the sacred. And Mari and Zenta says the spiritual dimension tries to be in harmony with the universe and strives for answers about the infinite and comes into focus when a person faces emotional stress, physical illness, or death. As long as the goal, the purpose of all this is for either individual who is participating or accessing their spirituality for the purpose of, or a care provider who is engaging or exploring spiritual options for the purpose of, to serve, to sustain, support, and vitalize the health and well-being of human spirit, promoting holistic health and instilling hope. There is always a potential for unintended negative results, and we'll look at that at the end. Now, I want to draw from I borrowed this from the website of the Canadian Association for Spiritual Care, and this was a collective effort over 1 year looking towards this week that also is the Spiritual Health Awareness Week, also known as Spiritual Care Awareness Week, depending on if someone is referring to a care provider or a care receiver. Now, on their website, the Canadian Association for Spiritual Care, focusing on this week, put out this statement that health encompasses the whole person, the mind, the body, the emotions, and the human spirit. Let us raise awareness that effective care must be holistic and include the human spirituality, And with that, they are also aware of some of the myths that are out there that causes people to either shelve their spirituality or avoid engaging or discussing anything to do with spirituality, especially in our diverse contexts and our differences in spiritual practices, beliefs, and cultural practices, and also sometimes when people use their understanding of spirituality and religion or religiosity is intertwined, and one is it's expected to be one and the same. So there is myths out there, including it's only for the dying or very ill. And the response is spirituality serves, or spiritual care practitioners serve all people at any and all stages of life, from cradle to the grave. The other myth is that it's only in hospital for patients, and that's not correct. Spiritual care practitioners are part of an interdisciplinary care team in diverse settings, whether it's educational context, whether in social context or religious context, even say in political context, all systems of life. The other myth is that it's only for religious people. Spirituality and religion is not one and the same. However, there are people who express and find that they nurture their spirituality through a structured religious organization, communion spirituality. But that doesn't mean that spirituality is only for the religious people. Spirituality is for all, but some people take the path of religion to access and tap into their spirituality for growth and well-being. Another myth is that spiritual care practitioners or individuals from spiritual discipline will try to convert or change my perspective or my beliefs. Practitioners adhere to strict code of ethics, which respect the values of all faith groups, all religious groups, all traditions, and all cultural groups and individuals. Finally, that spiritual care practitioners are homophobic or transphobic. Providers provide support to everyone, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. So finally, the hope and the goal is to access or engage or explore our spiritual beliefs, practices, our spirituality to support our physical health, our emotional health, and our mental health. And research has shown, researchers have come into a consensus when it comes to spirituality, that spirituality is a dynamic and intrinsic aspect of humanity through which persons seek ultimate meaning, purpose, and transcendence. And that seems to bring purpose in life. One other thing is that whether it's religion or spirituality, when it's religion is the search for significance that occurs within the context of established institutions that are designed to facilitate spirituality. Now, spiritual needs, whether it's concerns or distress or struggles or pain or existential distress, they're related to a person's spirituality and can best be addressed within. Those questions can best be addressed within one's spirituality and exploring and expanding sometimes what our understanding, our meaning, or our practices are. Sorry, I think I'm not sure what happened here. I'll go back up to end to references before. So one thing that comes up is what would fall in the realm of negative spirituality and what are the implications? Just as much as spirituality is a great resource for our health and well-being and our mental health, it is also, spirituality can also exacerbate, depending on negative spirituality, certain beliefs and practices, certain ways of engaging and being, where the focus is very much on the negative of guilt, sometimes misplaced guilt, and one thinking that when negative things happen, illness or challenges, it's because they have done something, they're guilty of something, and they deserve that and paying for that. Those are times that we engage and explore and ask to understand where individuals are coming from or people are coming from, to find out ways in which we can expand the narrative and expand the understanding and get a context to inform and help each other. Thank you very much for giving me that opportunity to share a little bit of my ongoing work with how we can engage and explore and tap into our spirituality and spiritual resources for the holistic health, physical, spiritual, mental, and emotional well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence, for that. Now we'd like to take some questions from the audience. And so if you'd like, please use the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to get to everybody's questions. Maybe just to kick things off, I've got a question for Sybil. Sybil, what are some ways that you yourself can activate the body and mind, essentially to improve your physical and mental health?
Well, I have suggested numerous ways in my book, Alone Time, how you can activate the body. Well, if you are at home and you want you have the time to be able to engage in physical activity, this is a good way to boost your physical health as well as your mental health. I know that during the pandemic, a lot of gyms were closed down. People couldn't go work out the way they wanted to. And it really meant rethinking about how to live your life. And so I ask people to think about their own space at home. How can they achieve this goal? Maybe it means changing what you do, going for daily walks, or what other type of activity is of interest to you. So physical activity or other kinds of things in your life like crafting, modes of self-expression to help manage your emotions, those kinds of things. There are many others, by the way.
Right, thank you. And I've got a question for Florence. Florence, what would fall in the realm of negative spirituality, and what would the implications be?
And I touched a bit on that towards the end. Sometimes that is what has caused people to be skeptical and sometimes not even want to engage in spirituality is considered because of diversity and different perspectives and worldviews. And also for people who have experienced what we call a spiritual injury, there has been an engagement with a negative spirituality. Negative, it could be religiosity or certain beliefs or practices. And when that was the experience, people, that word itself, spirituality, spiritual care, religion, triggers negative thoughts and feelings and emotions. Now, the best thing is not to throw away the baby with the bathwater, but to explore and know how else we can engage and understand, know the source of what was negative or the experience that was negative, affirm that, but also explore and find out to separate one spirituality with that which was maybe an external engagement, an interaction that went bad. A bad interaction with either nature or with others, or even with the deity. Now, to explore and expand the narrative and understand the source, to be able to tap from what is positive and helpful, and also increase and grow one's spirituality.
Right. No, thank you for that. I like your points around, how you can explore spirituality without necessarily focusing on, any specific religion, and how it's important to include, all aspects of, the spirituality in terms of the person, their emotional health and their physical health, all aspects of the person. All right, well, thank you. I've got another question for Sybil. Once you consider new ways to cultivate personal space for enhancing health and well-being, next, consider how you might persist in seeking solitude in the future. So, for example, if you're considering doing your job duties remotely, what strategies would you enable to feel more satisfied and productive with your performance?
It is a really good question. And it's actually one that I'm thinking about all the time, because it's easy to implement some strategies to see how they work, especially if you are doing your work from home. But the bigger question is, how do you sustain that over the long run? What would help you? And I think each person has to figure out how to do that on their own. So seeking solitude into the future may mean figuring out what it looks like from home, what changes might occur at home that might mean changes in how you do your work. So if suddenly, you were working at home and it was quiet, but suddenly you have a whole gang of people at home, maybe your children are home because it's a PA day or something else is going on and there's a lot of activity, then you do need to think about what does that mean in terms of me getting my work done. So I don't have specific answers, but I can say that in establishing that personal space, you do need to look ahead a little bit in terms of how that might change or evolve depending on those circumstances. Again, we're living in an ever-changing world, so we must always be vigilant in terms of those changes.
Right. And sounds like we always have to kind of monitor what these changes are and adapt to them. And I like the way that you talk about how everyone's got to find their own way. Both of you, I think, really emphasize that in terms of like, here's a general idea, but then each person's got to figure out how they're going to integrate it into their own lives. Okay, let's see. I've got another question for Florence. This is coming from our audience. So, Florence, where or how do you see employees and employers acknowledging and supporting spiritual health in the workplace without overstepping the personal and / professional boundary?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And in health context, we are already working towards that and making gains. And I can confirm that at least within my context, in my environment, it's working. Now, interest has increased within organizations about growing spirituality, mainly because it's been, there is research that supports the well-being, the health, and the positive effects of spirituality. Now, I know the question is always how you can do that in a diverse context. Excuse me for that. There is an overhead pager. Thank you for your patience. How it has worked is that acknowledging that we have our spirituality is expressed differently. For instance, I'm a spiritual care practitioner. I work in the hospital. People get admitted in the hospital have all their different beliefs, practices, religions, non-religious, exploring. How do we engage with people is respecting each other and trying to understand each other, finding common grounds. I'll just speak over the pager, sorry. Finding common grounds and what overlaps within our practices and our beliefs, and encouraging that which tends to contribute. Actually, there is a commonality, so we can focus on that. We have what I call staff reflection, annual staff reflection, and we look at our profession from our spiritual perspectives, invite everyone how they understand their profession. Is their profession a calling, a journey in the helping profession? And what aspect their spirituality feeds that? When people sense that there is respect for who they are, what they believe, how they believe, and an openness to understand, to engage and listen to our stories, people will be more willing to engage and bring their spirituality and allow their spirituality to inform what they do and how they do it.
Thank you, Florence.
Thank you.
I think that was a great answer to a very great question. All right, I've got another question for Sybil. Sybil, do you believe that working from home is sustainable and or will remain, I guess, sustainable as we move into a post-pandemic world?
Yeah, well, we clearly are in a post-pandemic world. I do want to make the point, though, that remote work came about even before the pandemic. Changes in work organization has made it so that businesses were already using a different model of having people work from home. So it has been going on, but where we start to see it becoming noticeable for larger bodies of people, it really came with the pandemic. And it made us realize that the way things happened quite hurriedly, that it wasn't working that well. People stumbled into it and had to really learn, huge learning curve in terms of making it happen. Do I see it as sustainable? I sure do. I mean, it is going to stay. I think it's going to stay. In a post-pandemic world, we are going to see more and more people doing it. Maybe not entirely. Maybe there will be times where people work from home with some element of flexibility and variable scheduling while also going to the office. But it does mean thinking carefully about what your work looks like at home. I don't think we do enough in terms of getting management involved in what that work looks like in terms of your health and safety. But it is a tricky one because your home is your home and it's your work site, but it's not everyone's work site. So I think more work needs to be done in terms of understanding how to make that sustainable.
Right. I guess that's one of the challenges, right? If you're working from home, that boundary can really blur between, your workplace and your home life. Thank you. All right, I've got another question for Florence. Are there community groups that you'd recommend for those people who are spiritual but not necessarily religious?
That's a great question. There are a growing number of people who identify themselves as spiritual and not religious. And then I also identify certain aspects of spirituality. Their spirituality for them is their relationships, whether it's relationships with each other, with nature, with deity. So I would say if people would, right now I don't have at the top of my head certain distinct community groups of people who identify as spiritual and not religious. It's possible that those will start growing. But there are people who identify as both. They're religious, they're spiritual, but their spirituality is nurtured and helped through a religious tradition or faith groups. So that much I'm aware of, but not specifically. Some of the ways that people find their spirituality expressed and they are not religious, they're spiritual, it can be in something, a passion they love, what they like, and they will find that they're already a club among that. There'll be people who may have a social group or they are passionate about something. It can be environmental issues or social justice. They have certain passions that bring them together. And in those contexts, they may be open and willing to explore their spirituality and learn from each other. So next time I'll try to look out to see, because this in our virtual world, more and more becoming virtual world, people also connect virtually. They may connect in different geographic regions based on their passions and interests. Those can be ways in which people can experience or express their spirituality. It can be sport or certain game, and they connect virtually. So far, we don't have physical places that people identify as spiritual, but it's nuanced under certain other passions and interests that are not labeled spirituality.
Thank you, Florence.
I know that because that's what people identify when you ask them what brings meaning and what gives them a sense of purpose. And for some, it can even be their employment, their job, what they do.
Right. I guess particularly the people who are in helping professions, healthcare, education, those would be especially the case. Okay. And Sybil, what are some things that we can incorporate during our work breaks to recharge?
That's a good question. There are lots of different things. If we are doing our work, usually office work does mean that we're sitting for long periods of time. So an obvious response to that would be some element of physical exercise or activity, stretches, doing some walking, like getting out of that physical room and getting outdoors where there's nature, sun. All of that is very healthy for us. Meditation and other mindfulness strategies can be done very quickly. Guided meditation can happen within 5 to 10 minutes, and it does wonders for our emotional health. There are other kinds of things one can do in terms of break time away from work. Reading your favorite book. Oftentimes we don't have time to read things that are just fun to do for us. And that's a good time to do that, to take, that 15 minutes or that half an hour break, whatever it is, to be able to do something for ourselves, something completely unrelated to our work. By the same token, doing your favorite craft or anything else. I'm going to say that I'm usually one to argue that social media can be a crutch and it can have a lot of disadvantages. But that being said, we certainly don't want to engage in social media while we're working. But there's no reason why we can't engage in social media and scroll news feeds and other kinds of things while we're in break mode. When we're working at home, we're often alone, talking to people on the phone or texting our favorite people, are other ways to stay grounded and to feel good about what we're doing. So I think those are all different ways, but helpful to take that break.
And
Yeah.
do you have any tips or strategies for people to, I guess, make those changes? Because, sometimes it's really difficult, right? We just get used to doing, the same thing, maybe in our homes and, working at our desk. And it can be difficult to, go for that walk or, do something different than just sitting there.
You're absolutely right that it is difficult for us to make change. And so when people come to see me in therapy, as you may be well aware, it's our job to bring about those suggestions so that they can try different things. But without seeking professional help, one needs to kind of figure out for themselves what to do. I always tell people, create a schedule, a visual schedule, if you will, of days of week and times of day, and fill it. Fill it with your tasks. So if your workday takes up a bit of that, a chunk of that time, take a bit of that time to figure out where you want to implement some of these other kinds of tasks. Like my daily walking happens early in the morning, and it happens for an hour and 15 minutes, and that's blocked off. Nothing else gets in the way. You're right, it's difficult to start, but once we do, maintaining it becomes easier over time. So it's just the key to create that schedule and commit to that schedule. And if you don't like the task, if walking's not for you, great. Fill it in with something that is for you, that works for you.
Right. Thank you, Sybil. All right, Florence, this is another question from our audience. I think it's a very interesting one. If you had a negative experience with religion in your past, can you suggest ways to reintroduce spirituality into your life?
That's a very good question. And I want to tie something with what Sybil has just said and then attempt a response to that question. Lois Delagran of University of Minnesota did a research on spirituality. And one observation she made is that emotions and spirituality are distinct, but linked, deeply integrated with one another. And some of the things that Sybil is mentioning about well-being, you'll find that for some people, even that walk is a spiritual exercise. Some of those are very simple habits, like a daily check-in, taking a breather or pacing down, or just gratitude, being out in nature. For some, it's intertwined with their spiritual practice. So what I'm trying to say is that human being is complex, and it's all this. We don't want to separate and address or say, this is now my spiritual practice, and then I'll move on to the next room and engage in something emotional or something physical. When it comes to having had a negative experience with religion, that bruised one's spirituality, it's similar to having been physically, maybe in an accident, in a situation or a relationship that psychologically injured somebody. We will not abandon. Spirituality is a positive thing, it's a good thing. The spirit is that which, the seat of emotions, that which nurtures the total human being. We will not abandon our spirituality based on that negative experience. We'll affirm that, acknowledge that, and seek individuals, professionals, practitioners who may be able to journey towards healing. One needs to go through some healing process. It's like an open wound that bruised their spiritual well-being and caused them to shut down or just suppress anything that can be or move towards or remotely spiritual. The ideal situation is to journey towards healing as where possible and where, without re-traumatizing individuals, explore to know, to understand what it was and put it in a certain context and address those things. It could have been misplaced judgment or abuse or insult, to put that into practice, and through narrative therapy, through expanding of the story, separate that experience, separate the words or the behavior that was directed toward an individual's spirituality or religion, so that we recoup, we recover, and start to rebuild our positive spirituality and engage. And for some, it may even mean exploring different ways to engage with religion, but first of all, building one's own spirituality, one's connection, relationship, the inner self, healing and reaffirming before attempting to re-engage. And it may mean taking a different path, or even not seeking that until one feels that they're strong, their inside has been emboldened to the point that they can go through, navigate that life without being re-traumatized. But we acknowledge that, yes, there are people and situations that either knowingly or unknowingly, they were injured and negatively engaged with, there was a negative engagement or connection with spirituality or religion, and that has caused people to be reluctant to want to give it a try again. Healing is important, healing before re-engaging, but I really encourage re-engaging and finding a different way, a positive, healthier spirituality and relationships.
Right. So it's definitely good to know that there is a path, in order to reintroduce that spirituality, despite the negative experiences that the person had in the past. Well, thank you. Okay, Sybil, what are some reasons people feel anxiety about spending time alone?
Oh, yes. The way we operate in society, and from a very young age, we learn that it is better to be with others. It is important to be with others, and it is not good to be ostracized from the social group. So it becomes a challenge to be alone, especially as we are growing, as our brain is developing. As we become an adolescent, we want to be even more connected with our social groups so that we develop our identity. And so when I ask you to be more alone or to spend time in solitude, I'm asking you to do the opposite of what the social group says, which is stay connected because you're going to be accepted and you're not going to be removed from the group. You will get the support that you need, etc. So I think there is that stereotype about solitude being a negative thing and making people feel anxious about it. I often explain to my clients that what they want to do is they want to explore and examine in their personal space what it feels like when they are alone. So explore those anxious feelings. You see, we bring up those anxious feelings ourselves, right? Because we have that alarm system that gets activated because we interpret that there's danger or threat. We interpret that we're going to be alone, that we're going to stay alone, that we're going to be isolated from the group. And because of that, we get anxious. So we don't want to be alone. It's about kind of reframing and thinking about, this is how I feel. I'm not going to be alone forever. I want to enjoy and embrace this time alone because I know that it's going to be healthy for me. So it is definitely reframing, reinterpreting. And but I can see where that anxiety comes from. Like I said, we've been conditioned from a very young age to be with others.
Thank you. All right, Florence, do you have any advice for someone who may be interested in becoming a spiritual care practitioner or therapist?
Another great question. There is a seminar that I give, and it's working towards a presentation that I made that's working towards a chapter in a book that is Spiritual Care and Psychotherapy. What is it, and how do we become one? Anybody can become spiritual care psychotherapist or spiritual care practitioner from different disciplines, different walks of life. A significant number tends to come from various faith traditions, having been credentialed to serve and seeing the need to serve beyond the limits and confines of their specific religion or faith tradition, and stepping out to explore and do some training that integrates behavioral sciences and spirituality in the helping profession. So it can be anyone who perceives the need, they perceive the calling or the need or a desire to help people and integrate spirituality in the process. There is a process of training, becoming more self-aware, and being credentialed and becoming regularized by a college of registered psychotherapists. So they prescribe the necessary path of training and required courses to take, a number of practical sessions then one gets credentialed with as an association and a college. Then become a practitioner, and it can be in any system. It can be health system, education system, correctional service, social system, or even in a faith religious tradition.
Thank you, Florence. I have a question for Sybil. Sybil, it isn't common practice for employees to feel comfortable taking self-care and nurture time as part of their sick days. And this person recognizes that this is partially due to the lack of legislated sick days. And what are your thoughts on workplace changes that allow for preventative mental health self-care?
I mean, it's a good question about the legislation. I simply do not have the answer to how to deal with the legislation itself in terms of, unpaid sick days and being so minimal. But okay, if we ignore that aspect and take a look at organizations, I've talked about management commitment, for example. So what that means is that organizations can take the lead on encouraging employees to do what they have to do for self-care. And so there's huge variability in workplaces. There's huge variability depending on the business sector, whether it's private, public. But the bottom line is that if workplaces do provide for flexibility, whether it's in terms of sick days, making up for days, caring for children, caring for elders, this is obviously beneficial for employees' health, for their mental health. And so it seems like an obvious thing from our perspective as we're talking about this, but some workplaces don't invest the time, the energy, or the money into this. And so it's unfortunate that it kind of lags behind the physical health or the physical safety of employees. When it comes to safety, we know a lot more, and companies do a lot more in order to preserve and save insurance premiums. But when it comes to mental health, we're lagging behind. So I do think more emphasis on what needs to be done, more research, and sharing that research with companies would be really important. And obviously for workplaces to feel comfortable that they can do that for their employees. But yes, definitely more conversation in this area is needed.
Right. No, that definitely resonates with me in terms of how mental health lags behind physical health. Because it seems like, one of the things I love about Canada is our universal healthcare system, but it's generally really focused on physical health and very little of it's focused on the mental health side of it.
Sure.
So I'm sure it's similar in legislation as well. Okay, so we only have time for one more question, and I'm going to pose it to both of you. So what would you say is one simple way to deal with a feeling of burnout?
I'll start, I
Go
guess,
first.
Florence.
So compassion fatigue or burnout in the helping professional, especially because that's where I'm coming, the perspective that I'm coming from. Compassion is the greatest asset of any health professional, but it's also a liability. The most important thing that someone can start, every individual is different, your needs will be different. Everyone is a specialist on themselves, on their own self-care. You'll assess whether you have certain habits and practices to disengage and take care of yourself after a difficult or caring in a stressful, critical situation, or whether you need to engage professionals. Either way, depending on your capacity, knowing oneself, being more and more self-aware helps, because then people will know when they're reaching their breaking point. And when they need to step back, access their own support or seek professional help.
Okay, let me echo your comments, Florence. So burnout, emotional exhaustion, it thankfully is not that common, but some people do experience severe stress and severe depression. And it is really difficult to overcome this on your own. If you're at the point where you're at burnout, that means it's almost like you do need to have some professional help a therapist to help you reevaluate your tasks, to help you reevaluate your goals, short-term and long-term, to help you see what behaviors are that are enabling the depression and to stop that essentially to help you reduce your depression. And so I feel that professional help would be warranted if you're at the point where you're experiencing burnout. Like I said, it is uncommon, thank goodness. But when it does affect a person, it affects all areas of their life. It affects the level of distress, but it also affects their day-to-day functioning in other areas, looking after their families or hanging out with their friends or just doing other things. So it is definitely important to capture that. And so I agree with Florence that one aspect may be to get some help for this.
All right. Well, that's all the time that we have. So thank you to everyone who submitted questions. And I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. But Sybil and Florence, thank you both for participating. It was a pleasure speaking with you. And thank you for all of you attending and your interest in Laurier research. We'll send a link to the recording in the next few days. And if you enjoyed today's event, Inspiring Conversations will return in 2025, and we look forward to seeing you then. So until then, have a great day.